Thank you, Christy, for reading that for us. What do you think about the decorations? Yeah, I think, that decor team. Yeah. It was definitely a team effort, including Steve and Brad had a little part in helping as well. So I really, really love them. I think it reminds me of like an iconic Thanksgiving dinner. I picture a very happy family gathered around a table, a delightful, peaceful day. They're laughing as they pass food to one another. Only that's not usually what my Thanksgiving dinners are like when we gather the whole family around the table. There's this song that my daughter listens to, and it's written by a Christian singer, and the premise, the first verse, says that there are so many songs about Christmas, but nobody ever makes a song about Thanksgiving. So he wanted to change that. So he writes this song, and it's called Gobble Gobble. And it's hilarious, and it's very catchy, frustratingly so. It'll get stuck in your head. But one of the verses goes like this. Grandpa's passed out, passing gas. But we've got pumpkin candles burning just for that. Someone brought up politics, now everybody's mad. And I thought, yes. That sounds more like the Thanksgiving dinners that I am used to. That sounds more like what happens when everybody is gathered together. And here we are on World Communion Sunday, and it's the Sunday that brings everyone to the table, all sorts of people from all sorts of places, and our theme today is the table of peace. The table of peace. World Communion Sunday is always the first Sunday in October, so that's why we're celebrating it today, but all other things equal, I'm not sure I'd have picked this Sunday to celebrate a theme called the Table of Peace. I am sure you, like me, can think of all sorts of things going on in our world that do not feel peaceful. I'm especially heartbroken by the recent damage from the hurricane and the stuff that is still being unfolded, people still without power and water. Some of the stories we read in the news are just devastating. And we're here today talking about the table of peace. And I considered changing the theme actually, or adjusting the sermon schedule, or forgetting it altogether because I don't really like spirituality that is removed from reality. But I read this devotional that Susie Bowman sent me, actually. And it kind of shifted my perspective. And in fact, this devotional was called The Table is a Time Machine, which gathered my attention. And it was talking about our ritual communion phrase, the one that we often say or read when we take together, and it is the one that is written on the front of our communion table. Would you say it with me together? Ready? In remembrance of me. In remembrance of me. We're going to talk about this being the table of peace, but first we need to talk about it being the table of remembrance. We come to the table of Christ to remember. First, to remember the story of Jesus. When I stand up there and I say, this is my body broken for you, and this is the cup poured out for you, this is the purpose of remembering what Jesus did for us. Even as Christians, as we go about our daily lives, sometimes the story of Christ's death and resurrection just still gets pushed to the back in the midst of everything else we have to do. And so when we come to the table together, the first purpose is to remember what he did, to bring it to the forefront again, the source and the story of our Savior. And of course, remembering the story also helps us remember our commitment to Christ, or at least our openness to him. One of the things we say is, no matter where you are on your journey with Jesus, you can come to the table. All are invited. By coming to the table together, we're showing that we're open to God's work in our lives, that we're willing to let God come and move in our lives. It means we're inviting Jesus through the presence of the Holy Spirit to lead us in his ways, to guide us in his ways. This is why we come to the table. This is what we remember. So we remember the story and we remember our commitment, but actually remembering means a little bit more than that. So picture this with me as we're talking about our perfect Thanksgiving. Picture this. Let's say there's a big family gathered around the table enjoying Thanksgiving dinner together, and they're all pleasant and good moods. Nobody's brought up politics. Nobody's mad yet. So they're all passing around the plates, and everybody's just kind of smiling and talking. And let's say there's a matriarch at the head of the table, a grandmother, and she's clearly kind of the leader of the family. And as everybody pass out the table, she says, "Hey, hang on a second." And everybody stops and kind of looks at her. And she says, "Do you remember last year at Thanksgiving when, before we passed out the food, we all took a moment to say what we were grateful for?" And the family kind of smiles and nods. And she says, "That was really meaningful, wasn't it?" And the family kind of looks at each other and they smile because it was meaningful for them too. And they all pause and wait for her to finish. And she goes, "Okay, well, thanks for remembering. Let's eat now." Right? Wait a second. That feels like something was missing. In our culture, when we talk about the concept of remembering, we're talking about a mental exercise. We use the term to just recall what happened, recall the story, or recall the situation. But in Jewish culture, from the time of the Old Testament and including the time of Jesus, and I think even now, the concept of remembering was much more than simply a mental exercise. The point of remembering, the purpose of recalling the past event, was to bring that event's power into the present. The purpose of remembering was to bring the power of the past event into the present. So when Jesus tells his disciples to remember, when we repeat that phrase and write it on our communion tables to do this in remembrance of him, we aren't just being invited into a mental exercise of recalling the story and the Last Supper. That's part of it. We remember the powerful story of Jesus from the past, but then we invite that powerful Jesus into our present. We open ourselves up to the power and the presence of God in our lives now. That's what Jesus meant when he says to remember, not just recall, but invite his work in us now and even today. And this is where we get to the table of peace. Inviting Jesus to do his work in us means that we're letting him guide us, that we're letting him lead us in his ways. And his ways are the ways of loving your neighbor as well as your enemy. And his ways are the ways of doing to others as you would have them do unto you. And his ways are also, like Joanne read for us earlier, the ways of seeking and pursuing peace. When we come to the table of Christ, we're inviting him to lead us in his ways, including in the ways of peace. You know, normally when we talk about Jesus, we talk a lot about love. And that's good. Of course it's good. That's accurate, right? God is love. The Bible tells us this. But I think maybe second only to love is the concept of peace. We don't talk about it too much, but peace, just like love, is one of the top 3 fruits of the Spirit. The Bible tells us that God is love, and the Bible also tells us that Jesus is the Prince of Peace. I do not think we can extricate peace from the ways of Christ any more than we can extricate love from the ways of Christ. Peace is absolutely entwined with who Jesus is and with what he did when he was here and what he continues to do now. But that word, peace, it's been diluted a little bit. I'm trying to think of some common phrases that have the word peace in it. I think about keeping the peace, or making peace treaties, or all the beauty contestants that want world peace, or all the people that strive for inner peace. There's a TV show where a character was leaving, he goes, "Peace out, my dudes." We use this phrase all the time. We use this word all the time, but I'll just confess, when I hear those phrases, I do not usually associate them with the peace of Christ. We hear the word all the time. But the peace that we're talking about here, when John 16, Jesus says that in this world we will have trouble, but he has come that we may have peace. Or in John 14, when Jesus says, "I give you peace, but I do not give it to you as the world gives." The peace of Christ, the peace at the table, the peace that we're talking about today, is of a different caliber than the way we just commonly use the word. So we're going to try something a little different right now. We're going to see if it's going to work. I found a really phenomenal video that talks about peace, that talks about the way peace is used in the Bible. So instead of me just describing the video to you, I want to invite you to watch the video. And hopefully technology will be our friend today. Oh, we do have sound. We just need to unmute the computer. It's on the soundboard.
In the Old Testament, the
Can we
Hebrew
go
word
back,
for
John?
peace
Can we
is
start it again?
shalom. And in the New Testament, the Greek word is eirene. The most basic meaning of shalom is the word peace is common in most languages. People can talk about peace treaties or times of peace. It means the absence of war. And in the Bible, the word peace can refer to the absence of conflict, but it also points to the presence of something better in its place. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word for peace is shalom. And in the New Testament, the Greek word is eirene. The most basic meaning of shalom is complete or whole. The word can refer to a stone that has a perfect, whole shape with no cracks. It can also refer to a completed stone wall that has no gaps and no missing bricks. Shalom refers to something that's complex with lots of pieces that's in a state of completeness, wholeness. It's like Job, who says his tents are in a state of shalom because he counted his flock and no animals are missing. This is why shalom can refer to a person's well-being. Like when David visited his brothers on the battlefield, he asked about their shalom. The core idea is that life is complex, full of moving parts and relationships and situations, and when any of these is out of alignment or missing, your shalom breaks down. Life is no longer whole, it needs to be restored. In fact, that's the basic meaning of shalom when you use it as a verb. To bring shalom literally means to make complete or restore. So Solomon brings shalom to the unfinished temple when he completes it. Or if your animal accidentally damages your neighbor's field, you shalom them by giving them a complete repayment for their loss. You take what's missing and you restore it to wholeness. The same goes for human relationships. In the book of Proverbs, to reconcile and heal a broken relationship is to bring shalom. And when rival kingdoms make shalom in the Bible, it doesn't just mean they stop fighting, it also means they start working together for each other's benefit. This state of shalom is what Israel's kings were supposed to cultivate, and it rarely happened. So the prophet Isaiah, he looked forward to a future king, a prince of shalom, and his reign would bring shalom with no end. A time when God would make a covenant of shalom with his people and make right all wrongs and heal all that's been broken. This is why Jesus' birth in the New Testament was announced as the arrival of eirene. Remember, that's the Greek word for peace. Jesus came to offer his peace to others, like when he said to his followers, "My peace I give to you all." The apostles claimed that Jesus made peace between messed up humans and God when he died and rose from the dead. The idea is that he restored to wholeness the broken relationship between humans and their creator. This is why the Apostle Paul can say Jesus himself is our eirene. He was the whole complete human that I am made to be but have failed to be. And now he gives me his life as a gift. And this means that Jesus' followers are now called to create peace. Paul instructed local churches to keep their unity through the bond of peace, which requires humility and patience and bearing with others in love. Becoming people of peace means participating in the life of Jesus, who reconciled all things in heaven and earth, restoring peace through his death and resurrection. So peace takes a lot of work, because it's not just the absence of conflict. True peace requires taking what's broken and restoring it to wholeness, whether it's in our lives, our relationships, or in our world. And that's the rich biblical concept of peace.
Right there, John. You can stop it. So many good things from that video that we could discuss, but I want to say this phrase again. To bring shalom means to make complete or to restore. To bring shalom means to make complete or to restore. So when we talk about the peace of Christ, we're talking about wholeness and restoration. And I very much believe that restoration, this shalom of God, begins in us before it moves outward. That shalom or peace is the transformation that begins in us when we start opening our lives to Christ. So Christy read this story for us, the prodigal son story that we've all heard before probably, that's relatively familiar to us. But one of the things that often gets overlooked in this story is the transformation that takes place when the younger son comes home. We talk about how the father forgives him. We talk about how the father accepts him. And we talk about the older brother, but we rarely talk about the transformation. The father accepts the son, but the father doesn't leave the son in his destitute state. And there's this popular Christian author and speaker, and he's host of the Holy Post podcast, and his name is Skye Jitani, and he puts it better than I could, so I'm just going to read you this quote. This is what he says. When the father saw the son, he ran and embraced his child, overjoyed to have him home again. But almost immediately, the father begins to transform him. He ordered the servants to put new shoes on his feet, a fine robe over his shoulders, and a ring for his finger. The son's humiliating identity as a poor pig farmer was being removed, and his dignity as a nobleman's son was being restored. The story is about our Heavenly Father's acceptance, but it is also about our transformation. The younger son, according to the video, if we use the same language, the younger son had been in a state of broken shalom. He needed to be restored, to be whole again. And this is not something that he could do for himself. He could not bring himself back into wholeness. He could not bring himself the restoration that he needed. Only the Father could do that for him. But the Son had agency in it. The Son had agency in his own transformation. He had to be open to it. He did this by returning home. He did this by coming back to the Father. And in returning, he allowed the Father to begin transforming him. So he had agency, but he was not responsible for his own transformation. It was the Father who began restoring the Son to shalom. And y'all, this is what gets represented when we come to the table of Christ. Coming to this table is our agency. It represents that we are open to the movement of God in our life. It means that we are open to the Spirit's work in us, to letting Jesus transform us. The same way that the prodigal son came back to the Father, and that was his agency of openness. When we come to the table, that's our agency of openness, letting God know that we are willing. We come as we are, just like the Son. We're accepted as we are, just like the Son, but God doesn't leave us as we are. God begins transforming us and restoring us and putting all the broken pieces back together, back into shalom. And so often when we hear this about like the broken pieces, it seems like we're talking about sin removal. Like the transformation of God is just about behavioral change and not sinning anymore. That's so often how it's talked about. But we're not just talking about getting rid of sin. We're actually talking about what it said at the beginning, that shalom doesn't just mean the absence of conflict, but the presence of something better in its place. There are all sorts of things in our lives that need restoration, relationships and situations, and maybe even our own value systems or belief systems or cultural identity or with things that we grew up knowing, things that we don't even know are out of alignment with the ways of God. But if we are open to God transforming us, then God will start doing that and we'll learn and realize new things. It actually makes me think of these decorations. The green gallery that we had for all of the summer and all of September was cool at the beginning. But I know, because most of you told me, that we were ready for a change. We were ready for it to shift. We had gotten used to it. It was time for it to go into something new. And what the decorating team could have done is just removed all the green and left it stark and bare. That still would have been a change, right? That still would have been a transformation, but that's not shalom. Shalom is the removal of some things and the addition of something better in its place. This is what God will do in us if we are open. All we have to do, like the Son, is give our consent for the Spirit to start moving in us. And this is how we begin to experience the peace of God, the shalom of God. It's a transformation. It's a realignment of our ways with the ways of Christ. And when we come to this table, like we're going to do here in just a minute, this is what we're inviting Christ to do in us. Restore us, make us whole, reveal to us the places that maybe we don't even know that we aren't whole, and restore them to bring us back into shalom. This is why we remember. This is why we come in remembrance, so that the power of the past event can be the power in the present, so that God's transformation starts in us and it also changes the world. This is what we're all invited to today as we come to the table. And we're going to talk more about the table of peace for the next few weeks, about God's transformational shalom. But today it starts in us. It starts with us. Are we open to it? As we prepare to come to the table together, I invite you to ask yourself that question. The good news is, God makes it available to all of us. Let's prepare our hearts for communion.